Hands where I can see him. Who's in charge here?
I'm a civilian officer. I disarmed the suspect safely. Everyone's fine.
Are there any weapons or threats left in the store?
No, sir. The suspect had a gun, now secured. No one else is armed.
Have you ever wondered what happens when doing everything flawlessly, utilizing years of elite tactical training to protect innocent lives, results in you being treated like the very monster you just stopped? Picture a scenario where the evidence is overwhelming, the witnesses are practically begging the authorities to listen, and the truth is captured in high-definition video from multiple angles. Yet the people sworn to protect and serve choose to ignore reality because their minds have already locked on to a preconceived bias. Before we dive into one of the most frustrating yet ultimately vindicating legal battles in recent history, let me ask you a question. If you witnessed a violent crime unfolding, would you risk your own life to step in? Hold on to your answer, because by the end of this narrative, you might look at that choice very differently. Our narrative centers on an individual named Arthur Vance, though his name could be swapped with any quiet, unassuming hero living in your neighborhood. Arthur was a highly decorated military veteran, having dedicated over a decade of his life to the United States Armed Forces. He had survived multiple overseas combat deployments, navigating the intense pressures of hostile territories. He carried the physical and emotional weight of those years, honored with medals for valor and wounds received in battle. More importantly, he served as a specialized instructor, teaching his fellow service members the critical art of close-quarters defensive tactics. His expertise wasn't just in taking down threats, it was in doing so with absolute precision, utilizing the minimal physical pressure necessary to secure a situation without causing unwarranted harm. He was a master of de-escalation, threat assessment, and lawful detainment. After transitioning back to civilian life, Arthur sought peace. He enrolled in higher education, pursuing a degree in criminal justice with hopes of continuing his life of public service. He was engaged, focused on his studies, and lived a quiet, structured life. It was a typical quiet evening in a suburban neighborhood. Arthur, dressed casually in jeans and a faded cap signifying his military service, walked into a familiar local market. The establishment was owned by an incredibly hard-working immigrant named Elias, a man who had spent over a decade building his small enterprise from the ground up to support his family. Because Elias had experienced the devastating impact of theft in the past, he had invested heavily in a state-of-the-art surveillance system. Every corner of his shop, from the cash register to the rear aisles, was monitored in real time. Arthur was a regular, a friendly face who often chatted with Elias about his college courses and upcoming wedding plans. On this particular night, as Arthur was quietly browsing the back aisles, the atmosphere of the peaceful store shattered. Another individual walked through the front doors, but his demeanor was entirely different. Clad in dark, obscuring clothing and a facial covering, this new arrival projected immediate hostility. He bypassed the merchandise entirely and marched straight toward the counter. Within seconds, the atmosphere shifted from mundane to lethal. A heavy-caliber firearm was drawn from a pocket and leveled directly at Elias's chest. The aggressor aggressively demanded the contents of the cash register, his voice echoing through the small space, laced with desperate malice. A nearby female customer, paralyzed by sudden terror, dropped out of sight behind a display rack, frantically clutching her cellular device to call emergency services. From his vantage point in the back of the store, Arthur heard the commotion. Years of ingrained tactical conditioning overrode any civilian panic. His heart rate steadied, his breathing slowed, his mind instantly entered a hyper-analytical state. He assessed the variables: one armed aggressor, two innocent civilians in immediate mortal danger, the weapon currently fixed on the store owner, and the aggressor's attention entirely consumed by the physical cash being handed over. The assailant's back was turned. Arthur did not rush in blindly. He calculated the exact moment of maximum distraction. As the armed individual grabbed the currency, slightly turning his body toward the exit, Arthur closed the distance with total silence. In a flurry of calculated kinetic motion, the veteran executed a flawless disarmament maneuver. He secured the assailant's weapon hand, applying precise mechanical torque that forced the firearm to clatter harmlessly to the linoleum floor. Utilizing the attacker's own momentum, Arthur seamlessly transitioned the struggle to the ground, pinning the suspect face down. There were no strikes thrown. There was no excessive aggression. It was a masterclass in lawful physical control. Arthur applied just enough strategic pressure to neutralize any chance of escape or retaliation, giving calm, authoritative commands for the individual to cease resisting. The immediate aftermath was a flood of relief. Elias, shaking with adrenaline, poured out his gratitude. The terrified customer emerged from her hiding spot, crying tears of profound relief, her smartphone already recording the aftermath. Arthur maintained his composure, instructing Elias to immediately contact emergency dispatch to report that a robbery had been thwarted, the aggressor was safely secured, and no medical assistance was required for injuries. Arthur even had the foresight to instruct the witnessing customer to carefully slide the dropped weapon away, using a barrier to preserve the forensic integrity of the fingerprints. Everything was handled perfectly, adhering strictly to the legal concepts of a lawful citizen's intervention and the preservation of a crime scene. Moments later, the flashing lights of law enforcement vehicles bathed the storefront in red and blue. Two responding officers rushed toward the entrance. As the lead officer pushed through the glass doors, his eyes quickly scanned the chaotic scene on the floor, and right there, in a fraction of a second, a catastrophic cognitive failure occurred. The officer did not see a highly trained veteran securing a violent felon. The officer looked at the physical appearances of the two men struggling on the floor and allowed a deeply ingrained implicit assumption to override his critical thinking. His brain instantly assigned the role of aggressor to the hero and the role of victim to the actual criminal, based entirely on visual prejudices. Instantly, the officer's hand went to his service weapon. Commands were shouted, echoing aggressively through the store. Arthur, recognizing the extreme danger of the misunderstanding, reacted with perfect compliance. He identified himself calmly, stating his military background, explaining the situation, and slowly raising his hands to demonstrate he was unarmed. Elias, the store owner, rushed forward, frantically trying to explain that Arthur was their savior, that the man on the bottom was the true threat who had just held him at gunpoint. But the lead officer suffered from auditory exclusion, a phenomenon where the brain blocks out crucial information because it is so hyper-focused on its own preconceived narrative. The officer ordered Arthur to the ground. Despite having just saved 2 lives, the decorated combat veteran was forced to lay flat on the cold floor, his arms wrenched behind his back and heavy steel cuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists. Meanwhile, the actual criminal, sensing the massive error playing out in his favor, immediately began acting the part of the victim, claiming he had simply walked in to purchase goods and was randomly attacked by Arthur. The ensuing moments defied all logic and standard investigative procedure. The officers discovered the discarded firearm on the counter. They searched the suspect and found a massive wad of stolen cash, along with the store owner's personal identification card, directly in the suspect's pockets. When they searched Arthur, they found nothing but his textbooks, his keys, and his military identification card. They had 3 separate eyewitnesses: the store owner, the recording customer, and another individual who walked in moments later, all screaming the exact same narrative. The man in handcuffs was the hero, and the man pretending to be a victim was the armed robber. Yet, driven by stubborn pride and an inability to admit a profound misjudgment, the lead officer decided to arrest both men. He claimed the situation was too confusing and needed to be sorted out at the precinct. Imagine the profound psychological toll of that moment. You spend your entire adult life putting yourself in harm's way for your country. You spend years learning how to protect people. You risk your life in a convenience store to stop a murder, execute the intervention flawlessly, and your reward is being shoved into the back of a squad car treated with the exact same suspicion and hostility as the violent felon sitting in the cruiser next to you. At the precinct, the absurdity only escalated. Both men were processed, fingerprinted, and placed into holding cells. When the actual suspect's prints were run through the national database, they triggered immediate alerts. He was a wanted fugitive with a long documented history of violent armed robberies and parole violations across multiple jurisdictions. The lead investigative detective assigned to the case took one look at the store's high-definition surveillance footage and was utterly appalled. The video laid out the undeniable truth in spectacular clarity. It showed Arthur's peaceful entry, the criminal's violent assault, the textbook disarmament, and the tragic, biased arrival of the arresting officers. The detective immediately ordered Arthur's release, offering profound apologies for the inexcusable violation of his civil liberties. But an apology does not erase trauma. An apology does not erase the humiliation of being paraded in handcuffs. And an apology certainly does not fix a broken system where implicit prejudice dictates who gets the benefit of the doubt and who gets thrown in a cage. The fallout from that evening was seismic. The store owner, absolutely furious at how his protector was treated, immediately contacted high-profile legal representation. Within days, local news syndicates had acquired the surveillance footage. When the public witnessed the undeniable heroism contrasted with the sheer incompetence and biased actions of the responding officer, the community erupted in justifiable outrage. Veterans advocacy groups rallied behind Arthur. Civil rights organizations demanded absolute accountability. The ensuing internal investigations pulled back the curtain on a deeply flawed local department. A thorough review of the arresting officer's personnel file revealed a disturbing historical pattern. He had multiple prior complaints regarding the use of excessive force and unlawful detainment, all of which followed a remarkably similar pattern of snap judgments based on appearance rather than evidence. Furthermore, statistical data showed a glaring disparity in his arrest records, highlighting a severe lack of objective reasoning in his policing methods. Those previous complaints had been swept under the rug by internal review boards, crippled by conflicts of interest, allowing a dangerously biased individual to continue patrolling the streets. The district attorney scrutinized the case, and while they determined the officer's actions did not quite cross the threshold into criminal prosecution, the civil courts told a vastly different story. Arthur filed a massive civil rights lawsuit against the city and the officers involved. The claims were devastatingly comprehensive: unlawful arrest, severe violation of constitutional rights protecting against unreasonable search and seizure, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and gross negligence in departmental training protocols. When the trial commenced, the courtroom became an arena of absolute accountability. The defense attempted to argue that the officer acted reasonably given the chaotic nature of the scene, but the plaintiff's attorneys systematically dismantled that defense. They played the crystal-clear audio and video for the jury. They brought Elias to the stand, who tearfully recounted how his desperate pleas were ignored. They brought forward military tacticians and police use of force experts, who unanimously testified that Arthur's actions were not only legally justified but represented the absolute pinnacle of perfect citizen intervention. The climax of the trial occurred when the arresting officer took the stand. Under intense cross-examination, he was forced to confront his own profound cognitive dissonance. He was asked to explain how he could ignore a discarded weapon, stolen cash found on the actual suspect, a military identification card, and 3 screaming witnesses, all to arrest the wrong man. He had no logical defense. He was finally forced to confront the ugly truth. His decision was not based on police procedure. It was based on an instant, flawed assumption triggered by his own deeply rooted prejudices. The jury's deliberation was brief, and their message was deafening. They found the defendants liable on all counts. The resulting settlement was staggering, easily crossing into the 8-figure range. Millions of dollars were awarded to Arthur to compensate for the emotional devastation, the defamation of his character, and the violation of his fundamental liberties. Millions more were levied in punitive damages against the municipality, designed to act as a massive financial deterrent against allowing biased policing to go unchecked. The consequences for the officers were equally severe. The lead officer was rightfully terminated, his career in law enforcement permanently extinguished, and he was held personally liable for a portion of the financial damages. His partner faced lengthy unpaid suspensions, mandatory retraining, and a permanent stain on her record that eventually led to her quiet resignation. But the most important outcome was the systemic overhaul. The massive financial loss forced the city to completely rewrite its protocols. They implemented rigorous, continuous training focused on dismantling implicit prejudices and understanding the psychology of snap judgments. They created independent, civilian-led oversight committees to review all future complaints of biased policing, stripping the department of its ability to investigate its own flaws in secret. They instituted mandatory procedures forcing officers to verbally verify and assess the totality of the scene, listening to witnesses and examining physical evidence before placing citizens in restraints. Arthur used his portion of the settlement to finish his education, eventually becoming a highly sought-after consultant who travels the country teaching law enforcement agencies how to recognize proper citizen interventions and, more importantly, how to combat the internal biases that destroy trust between police and the communities they serve. Elias, the store owner, even set up a scholarship fund in Arthur's name dedicated to helping veterans transition into careers in legal advocacy. So what is the ultimate takeaway from this intense saga? It all comes down to the terrifying power of the human brain's desire to take shortcuts. Our minds are biologically wired to process visual information in milliseconds, matching what we see to internal patterns before our conscious thought can even catch up. The disgraced officer didn't consciously stop and calculate a malicious plan. His brain instantly locked onto a flawed pattern, and his ego refused to let him admit he was wrong, even when a mountain of evidence was screaming at him. When pride prevents you from admitting a mistake, especially when you hold a position of authority, the collateral damage is immeasurable. The officer didn't just traumatize a hero that night. He sent a chilling message to every other capable citizen watching: do not help, do not intervene. Because if your physical appearance doesn't match the officer's preconceived notion of what a good guy looks like, you will become the victim of the system. The next time you find yourself in a high-pressure situation, making a rapid judgment about a coworker, a stranger on the street, or a complex conflict, force yourself to pause. Take 3 deep breaths. Ask yourself, am I reacting to the actual facts in front of me, or am I reacting to the story my brain automatically assumed? Those 3 seconds of critical reflection are all it takes to separate a tragic injustice from the truth. 3 seconds could have saved a decorated veteran from the cold bite of steel handcuffs. When you are proven wrong about someone, will you possess the humility and courage to immediately correct your course? Or will you let your pride drag you all the way down to total ruin? The choice is always yours. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into the complexities of human nature and justice. I'll catch you in the next one.